Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing well. So we're continuing our reading of St. Augustine's Confessions. We are in Book 1, and this is an interesting section that he has about infancy, which I think will make you have a lot of introspection and curiosity in and of itself. So, let's begin. I do acknowledge you, Lord of heaven and earth, and I praise you for my first beginnings, although I cannot remember them. So here, you notice he's praising God, even for the things he can't remember. And no one of us really, at the forefront of our mind, can remember what happened at our young age. Now, I have heard certain people who've survived satanic rituals in their testimonies contend that they've survived some horrific things. And then other psychologists have said at that age certain traumas can stay in the mind, but here you see the positive side of where he's praising God for his first beginnings on this planet and to not leave out anything in ingratitude. But you have allowed men to discover these things about themselves by watching other babies. Now here's the genius of that, is that we can learn about how we were when we were babies by observing babies. And, it really gets at the innocence of children, the miracle of life. Secular liberal feminist atheists who are anti-human and have a sort of death cult, baby dismembering mantra that they march by, may not see anything to discover in a human baby because of how they glorify tearing apart what they call a fetus, right? Just a clump of cells to them. But here, he's showing us the spiritual side of looking at children and discovering more about yourself through that child, even if it's not genetically related to you. And that you should thank God for your first beginnings. And also, to learn much from what women have to tell. Yeah, women, we do have a lot to say about the babies. I know that I was a living person, even at that age. And as I came towards the end of infancy, I tried to find signs to convey my feelings to others. It's true. It's like when they start to crawl out of that stage, they start to learn how to really get across what they're trying to tell you, right? When they're trying to eat, and like a mother has to figure out like what's going on here with the little one. What is the necessity of the time to make the children happy? It's really like an investigation. It's quite fun. Where could such a living creature come from, if not from you, Lord? Here, a proof for him is that babies are a sign of God's creation, God's power, because in such a little tiny human, so much is possible, and he's contending that they are their little persons. They won't remember who they are at that time, but it's still going to add to who they are, right? So he sees the miracle of life in a baby, which is quite true. Children are amazing. Can it be that any man has skill to fabricate himself? Well, some of these lab people, some of these scientists are trying. They really want to split the ears of cattle. Or can there be some channel by which we derive our life and our very existence from some other source than you? Now, for us Muslims would say no. There is no other source that can be derived from, because all bounty comes from Allah, and nothing can occur except by His permission. I believe St. Augustine knows that as well, but he's prompting us to think. Surely we can only derive them from our Maker, from you, Lord, to whom living and being are not different things. Since infinite life and infinite being, so here's these two terms, infinite life and infinite being, because God will never die, and never exist. Never cease to exist, right? So it's eternal. Or one and the same. For you are infinite and never change. In you, today never comes to an end, and yet our today does come to an end in you. Now that's pretty cool, right? How he wrote that. Today never comes to an end in God, but we come to an end of today in God. You see? Because time, as well as everything else, exists in you. So here, this is an interesting one because this kind of gets at the theories of the relation between God and time. Is God outside of time? Well, we would know that God would have full control of time. And it would be something under the dominion of God. I would say that as a Muslim. Not sure how a Catholic would say it. If it did not, it would have no means of passing. And since your years never come to an end, for you they are simply today, the countless days of our lives and of our forefathers' lives have passed by within your today. So here he's getting at just the span of time, right? Is that forefathers' lives have passed within your today. So the today of God is different than the today of the humans. So he's really highlighting the circumference of time, the passage of time, and the relativity of time. From it they have received their due measure of duration. Due measure of duration. So fully admitting that God is the one who will make the proportion and the term, which we as Muslims know that there's always going to be a term appointed for everything, and Allah is in full control of that because Allah is most capable of everything. And so it will be with all the other days which are still to come, but you yourself are eternally the same. In your today, you will make all that is to exist tomorrow, and thereafter, and in your today, you have made all that existed yesterday, and forever before, and forever before. So notice this. In your today, you will make all that is to exist tomorrow, and then so on and so forth, in your today. So tomorrow is still today for God, right? And that he's really getting at the differences of today. Because if you reflect, he's mentioned today in several instances. In you today never comes to an end, yet our today comes to an end in you, right? And that forefathers' lives have passed away within your today. And now he mentions it in another way, right? And that the due measure of duration is reflected in the today of God and the today of everything else. Need it concern me if some people cannot understand this? Let them ask what it means, and be glad to ask. So here, being joyous to ask, eager to ask, wanting to ask. But they may content themselves with the question alone. So that's interesting. So you may have a question, you may not find an answer, but you're content with just the question. For it is better for them to find you and leave the question unanswered than to find the answer without finding you. Oh, you see that? You see that? It's better to have a question unanswered and to find God than to find an answer without God. Right? It's interesting. The way he writes, man, it's very entertaining, very thought-provoking, very personal, you know? And remember, he's one of the great scholars of Christianity. So if you're going to listen to somebody who is going to act like an authority on Christianity and they've never read or heard of St. Augustine, I would ask you to really consider, is this person a viable source of information? Have they gone through with it and really thought about it? And if they're setting themselves up as an authority, they have to go through the necessary hoops, taking the time, the due diligence, the hard work, the introspection, to be someone who can speak upon these Catholic scholars. Because only an ignoramus, only a charlatan, a sophist, a degenerate moron would ever open their mouth and scoff at something they haven't read. They would simply be more humble and say, you know what? I haven't read it. Maybe one day I will. What do you know about it? That's much better. So avoid people who scoff and minimize things they haven't read and then act like an authority on such a subject. Because people who have taken the time to read these texts by these scholars, you gain more respect for them as a person. Doesn't mean you agree with everything they said, but you respect that they took the time to put their ideas on paper, even though they're a different faith, and you simply think, they at least occupied their time in a productive way instead of selling drugs, causing trouble, and in that, you owe a certain level of respect for people. That's what I'd say. That's my personal ethics, right? Because some people have more respect for people who just shout on the street than they do for actual people who sit down and write very thought-provoking books, right? So let me know what you think.